Unconscious conversation refers to the fact that whenever we are speaking, there are actually two conversations that are going on. One with the conscious mind of the audience, but the other with the unconscious and subconscious mind. And that is a much more powerful conversation that can derail most of what you're trying to communicate with an audience. Now, most executives believe that communication is their fundamental skill set. And the research says that 75% of CEOs believe it's the number one leadership attribution. But 70% of employees in the same survey say that their leaders don't communicate effectively. This creates the communications conundrum. And this problem exists because of the unconscious conversation. Communication is actually an emotional experience. All of our senses, sight, taste, sound, are all connected first and foremost to our emotional brain, which is our limbic system, our reptilian brain, where our fight or flight response exists. And that is where all the decisions are made about what information goes into your conscious thinking brain. So we need to learn how to communicate emotionally. As Teddy Roosevelt said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So you need to be conveying emotion to an audience all the time just to hold their attention. So I think that people should redefine the phrase CEO. I believe CEO means Chief Emotional Officer, because executives are responsible for the emotional effectiveness of their teams. And the only way to get people excited and inspired and motivated is to communicate with them in an emotional manner. So let's talk about the anatomy and physiology of emotional communication. There are three fundamental components of interpersonal communication. There's the content, the words that you say. Then there's extraverbal, what we call intonation and inflection, vocal tone or paralanguage. And third is nonverbal or body language. Now, when I ask CEOs to tell me, rate each of these three in importance by percentages, most people will say that by far content is the most important part of interpersonal communication. Well, unfortunately, the research says otherwise. The words are really only worth 7%. The sound of your voice is much more powerful at 38%. And your body language, do you look like someone I should listen to? Well, that is the most powerful part of interpersonal communication. Now, this does not mean that words are not important. They are. If you get the words wrong, everyone will notice. But the real problem with the vast majority of business communicators is they get all the words right, but they don't make an impact on their audience. And why is that? It's because they're not appealing to the unconscious conversation. So the fact of the matter is, the human brain has trouble shifting between thinking and communicating. So when we're speaking, if we have to stop to think, we also stop the facial expression and the tone of our voice from being attached to our emotions. As you see from these pictures, hearing words, saying words, seeing words, thinking about words, these all happen in different parts of our brain. And in order to move from one task to the other, we have to shift gears. And when we shift that gear, even though it happens in a nanosecond, it becomes apparent in our facial expression and in the tone of our voice. So listening is an emotional experience. Now, 99.9995% of brain function is unconscious or subconscious. Brain processing power becomes very important to understand. The unconscious brain works at 10 million bits per second. It's the most powerful computer on the planet. But the conscious brain can't compete with the unconscious. The conscious brain works at 50 bits per second. That is 200,000 times slower. So the difference in speed between your emotional brain and your conscious thinking brain, the one you can have a conversation with, well, that gap is a big problem for most speakers when they're speaking to an audience. And the reason is that our emotional brain understands emotion much faster than it understands words. And your face is defining those words. So your face is either going to support or distract or contradict your words. So think about how many times you've heard someone use a word that really didn't sound the way it meant, the way it was defined. You weren't sure if they were being sarcastic or not, because that speaker created a disconnect with your emotional brain. And your emotional brain stopped your conscious brain from listening. And this is what happens to the vast majority of speakers when communicating with the vast majority of audiences. So thinking disconnects your emotions from your words. So we cannot think and maintain eye contact, and we cannot think and maintain emotion in our voice and powerful language with our body at the same time. It just can't be done. In fact, it's impossible to smile and sound unhappy. Well, your smile is connected to your facial muscles, so we can see and hear you smile. So we don't want people to think about what to say. We want them to know what to say. When you know what to say, you're connected to your emotions and you sound like you mean everything you say. So communication isn't just about what you say or how you say it, it's both. And thinking sounds like you're not sure, you don't know, or that you're making it up. So 60 Minutes was created because Don Hewitt, who created the show, understood this premise, even though the science wasn't behind him. His philosophy was there's nothing more interesting than the human face under duress. And if you watch the show, you'll know that every 60 Minutes investigative story goes to a climax when the bad guy comes apart at the seams on camera, when they're caught lying. And all of that is based upon not what they're saying, but how they look and sound as they are saying it. Because the appeal isn't to the conscious brain, it's to the emotional brain. So thinking creates a blank expression. Here are some famous faces, all of whom are doing nothing except showing us no expression at all. But they all look angry. They all look intimidated. And why is that? Facial recognition software tells us that the human brain interprets blank expressions as intimidation or contempt. And it's the same for women as it is for men. I'm sure you may be familiar with the phrase RBF. You can Google RBF and you'll find millions of pictures of men and women. We call that resting blank face. Well, when you're listening and have that face, it's intimidating. But when you are speaking and thinking simultaneously, and your face goes expressionless and your voice goes blank, you are just as intimidating and just as irresponsive to an audience as possible. So what I want you to think about is that any important communication is the wrong time for original thought. You cannot successfully communicate with people on the fly. You just can't wing it. If you do, you run the risk of becoming disconnected from your emotions and your words. So you have to be well prepared. You need to know what to say so that you can always be connected to your content. So it all comes down to simply this: the messenger is the message. We can't separate you from your content, nor do we want to, but the message has to be well created and then has to be well performed, because both the messenger and the message are of equal value. So great communicators aren't born. It's a learned and practiced skill. And you can learn how to take the next step and get the most out of your presentations by starting to focus on the unconscious part of the conversation as well as the conscious part, so that you can make sure that as the messenger, your message is powerful. So let's think about how to make the leap from thinking to knowing. Well, it really starts with understanding that it's not the audience's responsibility to understand anything that you're saying. It's your responsibility to be clear. So that means creating content, thinking about what people really need to know, what they really need to understand, and then following the three rules of good presentation, which is one, simplify, two, oversimplify, and three, make it even more simplistic so that no one in the audience can possibly miss what you're trying to articulate. In fact, it was Albert Einstein who said, if you can't explain it simply, you just don't understand it well enough. So we always want to be focusing our content at the lowest common denominator, because simplicity offends nobody. If you say things that some people understand, they will just agree that that's correct. But when you communicate that way, you will also satisfy all the other people who might normally miss what you're trying to get across. The other thing to think about is less is always more. The length of a presentation does not equate to its power. In fact, the Gettysburg Address, the most powerful speech in American history, was just 272 words. That's about 2.5 minutes of talking. You know, the guy who spoke before Lincoln that day in Gettysburg spoke for 2 hours. Do you know who that was? I don't. Nobody cares. So when you are trying to communicate both consciously and unconsciously, you want to follow the three P's, and that's plan, practice, and perform. First off, when you're planning, we want to communicate by objective, the same way that you run your business. You want to have a very clear goal of what you're trying to get across to your audience and how you want them to react. You should be attempting to motivate and to inspire. You want to pursue simplicity and clarity. Make messages that are emotionally relevant as well as important. Don't depend upon facts and data. Tell stories. You know, facts and data are the how and what, but telling a story is getting to the why. So facts and data are always supporting evidence. They aren't the reason for your presentation. And finally, you want to connect all of your personal values in what you say and your principles to your business goals, so that it's easy for the audience to understand that you are real, that you're authentic, someone with credibility and integrity that they can believe and trust. On to practice. This is all about rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. The vast majority of business speakers spend a great deal of time creating their presentations, but very little time rehearsing. And as I said earlier, the messenger is the message. So that's a 50-50 equation. You want to practice until you don't need notes or a script, until you just know what to say. And then you want to rehearse with the same energy and emotion that you plan to deliver your presentation, because you need to look and sound like you mean every word you say. If you don't look and sound like that, why would an audience listen to you? If you don't care, they won't care. Say what you mean when you perform and mean what you say. That's really the most important thing to remember. Audiences are attracted to emotion. So when it comes to performance, you need to fill up the screen with energy and with attitude and positivity. And think about it this way. A good performance is really 10% what you say and 90% how you feel about what you say. So the unconscious conversation, while it is foundational, is also ignored. But you can master both the conscious and unconscious conversation with a little bit of hard work. And if you can't get there by yourself, don't be afraid to reach out to a coach who really understands how to get your point across. Thanks for your time. I'm Lee Zeidman.